Council is funded by a voluntary checkoff with the processors Northern Excellence, RL Growers, and Half Street Seed contributing to the cause. We also receive a lot of money from different sort of grant funds from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and other sources that help fund this research. So with that, I think we'll get the program started. Our first presenter is actually Dr. Juan Ortiz from the University of Minnesota. He's a graduate student working under Dr. Eric Watkins, and he's going to talk a little bit about strategies for reducing seed shattering in perennial ryegrass. So welcome, Juan.
Thanks, Richard. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Looks good.
Okay. Well, just to clarify something very quick, I'm a master's student. This is my second year of my master's program, and a little bit about my background. I am originally from Colombia. That's where I did my undergrad in agronomy before coming to the United States, to the University of Minnesota. And today I'm very excited to share with you some of my research, especially the strategies that we are adopting to address the problem of seed shattering in perennial ryegrass. We know that perennial ryegrass is a multifunctional crop. In the United States, it's mainly used as a turf, but it's widely used around the globe for as a forage as well. And perennial ryegrass also has some ecosystem services. It's good for improving quality of soil and water quality. And because it has so many attributes, and there are many traits that we need to consider when we want to develop varieties that are successful. However, the success of a variety pretty much depends on its ability to produce profitable yields. Therefore, at the University of Minnesota, we are very interested in maximizing yield. And to maximize yield, there are two approaches, or in general, two approaches that we can adopt. One is through agronomics, and the other one is through breeding. In agronomics, the idea is to optimize the management practices in terms of timing, fertilization, maybe the use of plant growth regulators, the equipment and timing for protocols for seed cleaning or harvesting, etc. Whereas in breeding, breeding is some sort of reconfiguration or changes in the genetics of these plants so we can improve their biological potential to increase seed yield jointly with other traits of interest. However, this is a difficult task. If we do it through agronomics or breeding, regardless, it is a very difficult task because yield is a complex trait that is controlled by multiple genes. It's not like maybe you're familiar with a sugar tolerance too. That's a more straightforward problem where there is not many genes controlling the trait. But for yield, it's a very difficult situation. Nonetheless, this is important given its profitability. Compared with other crops grown in Minnesota, perennial ryegrass can be about 3 times more profitable per unit of per acre, per unit of area compared to soybeans, or even more than 4 times more profitable than other crops like wheat. Yet the yields, the average yields in Minnesota are quite low. From the total potential that the plant theoretically could produce, in Minnesota we produce about 8% of that potential. So this is how it will look like if we try to increase a little bit of the yield. In yellow, we have here the yield. By the way, can you see my mouse? Okay. So in yellow, we have yield, and in green, the profit. By increasing 25% of that production, the yield, we could have about 222% those profits that we currently get. If we increase to 50% the yield, then this starts to look even better, about 350% of those profits. Therefore, for us, it's very interesting or important, as it is for you, to know where yield comes from and how we can improve yield. And again, this is a difficult problem that we need to take by different parts. So if we look at this graph on the left of the dashed line, we have the yield formation, where yield comes from biologically. And on the right side, we have what we lost from anthesis to harvest. We start with 100% of the florets, and then some of them will not make it to seeds because there is problems with pollination, fertilization, or abortion. What will leave us with this will leave us with about 2/3 of those florets becoming seeds. But this is not what we will be able to harvest, given that 10% of this is going to be lost due to shattering. And from the remaining seed, more than half is going to be lost in the docking or cleaning process due to light seeds. So after all, we're just going to have 20% of those florets that will be harvestable. And this is an overall problem that is mainly related to the uneven flowering and uneven ripening in the plant. You know that in a crop we have main tillers, represented by this number 1, secondary tillers, tertiary tillers, and so on and so forth at the same time. So you want to harvest this main tiller, which has the big seeds, the heavy seeds, but you don't want to wait too long because otherwise you don't want to harvest too soon or too long, because otherwise you end up having these light seeds. Now, if we want to increase our profitability, then we need to understand, or if we increase yield, we need to understand where exactly we should put our focus. And it seems like the main problem here, or the bigger portion of yield losses, are due to light seeds, and while shattering is just a small percentage. However, 2 important things about this graph. First, it just considers shattering before harvest. At harvest, losses can be around 24%, so which make it even more significant. And the other thing is that this graph also considers only the number of florets, the number of seed. It doesn't tell anything about the weight. It turns out that the seed that shatter, those seeds that are heavier. So shatter in reality is a big problem in perennial ryegrass, more than what we think. This is an image of just a general spike with their spikelets and the rachis, which is the structure in the middle where those spikelets are. If we zoom into these spikelets, right below those florets where the seed is going to form, there is something called the abscission zone. And that abscission zone is just a layer. It's a structure of some cells that it will just form a type of a fissure, a cut that will progressively develop and cause that detachment of the floret from the spikelet. And if we zoom into one of these seeds or florets, here we can see the abscission zones. Right here, where it's going to detach, but the abscissions are in different parts. It can be below the floret. It can be inside where the seed is. It can also be in the rachis and causing the detachment of the whole spikelet. And we know that this is mainly regulated by hormones, but it's a difficult, shattering is difficult, it's complex as well. And yeah, the main thing is that we know is that it's regulated by hormones, but it's also highly influenced by spike architecture, which is something that might play as could be a benefit for us in terms of understanding. I will explain that in a second. The point here is that if we want to achieve these yields and profitability, maybe we can start to look at shattering from or the abscission zone, how we can delay that abscission zone and increase or either delay the development of the abscission zone, or just getting rid of it if possible. If we did that, this is a graph that shows those tillers again, the main tillers, the secondary, tertiary tillers, and these are the days after they emerge and their weight. And all of them kind of plateau at about 35 days after emergence. But this is each tiller, right? So 35 for one tiller, then later the other tillers. If we could just delay that formation of abscission layer or abscission zone, we'll be able to harvest more of that main tiller. We'll be able to harvest more of that secondary tiller, perhaps more of the other tillers. And this will result in more seeds and heavier seeds. Now, this sounds very beautiful, very nice, but is it possible? Can we develop varieties that are non-shattering? The answer is it depends. It depends on certain unknowns, certain things that we don't fully understand. One of them is the variability. And by that, I mean, is it due to genetics? Is it due to the environment? We need to first answer that question to understand, to see whether we can breed for non-shattering cultivars. And to answer that, we need a measuring system that is accurate, that is precise, and is high throughput, which means we can, what this means pretty much is we want to always get measure accurately the trait. If this is the target, this is exactly what shattering is. We want something that anytime we are trying to estimate it, we are around that true value rather than apart. And we are also consistent without much variation different from this. So we want something that is accurate, precise, but also we want something that saves time. We want something that measures multiple spikes, thousands of spikes if possible, in a quick amount of time, quickly. The problem is that shattering is really difficult to measure, and we rely mainly on visual measurements. You may think one spike has 30% of shattering. Somebody might think it's 31, it's 32. Your neighbor might measure in a different way. So it's subjective, it's not precise, not accurate, and we cannot measure large amounts of these trait accurately. So how do we solve this issue? Well, one idea is through the use of image analysis, imaging system. This is an example in rice where they look at the panicle architecture, panicle morphology, and the idea is that they wanted to find the genes that increase that yield, that seed yield, and therefore profitability. So two important things that they did here, or the main points about this, is that first they looked at multiple traits, multiple characteristics of this panicle all at once. They collected all this data in a matter of seconds. And they used something called composite traits. And by using these composite traits, they found genes that are not associated just to panicle length or number of branches or the length of the internode, but instead it's about proportions, a little bit of panicle length, a little bit of number of branches, a little bit more than other, higher contribution from other traits in the rate. And overall, it's just a composite trait that is made of multiple characteristics with multiple contributions. And by doing that, they were able to then find genes that were able to increase that yield potential in rice more than just by looking at individual traits. This approach of image analysis has already started. Travis Tubbs and Dr. Thomas Chastain have already started this idea of looking at 3D imaging using this type of sensor of cameras. It takes a ton of 2D images and allows them to reconstruct a 3D model where they can look at that shape of the spike and try to infer like what's the effect of that shape on shattering. So let's recap what I've said so far. We know that profitability in perennial ryegrass depends pretty much on the ability to produce seed, therefore seed yield. We know that seed yield it's determined by the spike architecture. And we also know that seed shattering severely affects seed yield. But we cannot really measure seed shattering accurately in a large scale and consistently. But maybe we can look at the spike architecture and use it as a proxy. This will be, imagine that we have multiple spikes, that we get measurements of the length, we get the width, maybe different differences at different sections of the spike, the number of florets, the number of florets that shatter and their degree and overall area. And from these, we make also those composite traits. So that will be an interesting idea. And what we are trying to ask in this research is whether we can use image analysis to understand that variation in seed shattering. Because if we have a reliable measuring system that will tell us something about the spike architecture, we could probably get to know something about shattering as well and how they are related. And by getting this information, we'll then be able to have a better idea of how to increase yield. And this is just translated to how to increase profitability. The way we're doing this, or let's say one of my first objective in my research, is therefore looking at that relationship between spike architecture and seed shattering. And the way we're doing this is by using a regular simple flatbed scanner that costs less than $70. That we put the spikes in the scanner, very lightweight scanner, and then we get images. And this is the fun part. This is how an image looks like from the scanner. So with an imaging system that we are building, we extract each of those spikes. We clean that background, then we use some algorithms to detect some branching patterns. Then we can measure what's the distance between florets, or between spikelets, perhaps florets, and many other dimensions that we're interested in. And we can also detect spikelets. There are still some things that we need to fix in the system, but eventually we will be able to separate and detect those spikelets that shatter from those that haven't shattered in a matter of seconds. So this system is supposed to take multiple infinite amount of traits as the imaging system improves in quality. And the idea is not to tell you all the traits that we're measuring, but more the type of clusters that we're looking at. So we're looking at differences in color, how yellow or green the spikes are, what are their dimensions, and also relationships, how many spikelets per spike or florets. And we also look at different parts of the spike. And the idea is that maybe we can, with this, make some of those composite traits to explore the genetics and see how we can improve the trait. We are also measuring shattering from a shattering nursery where we have a lot of material from that is genetically diverse, and we cross them, and in each of these blocks we have parents and offsprings, and we just look at differences. And then we induce shattering. We harvested them 4 times in a period of 3 to 4 weeks. Then we induce shattering, mechanical detachment using this wrist action shaker that will then leave us the amount of seeds that shatter, the weight, and then the seeds that will retain after we hand thresh them. So what we expect, the expected outcomes of this research are, first, that imaging system that it will allow researchers to facilitate research for us, but could potentially be used by growers as well. Imagine that you have a scanner, a lightweight scanner. You can just go to the field, take images of different spikes, and with that sort of predict the potential yield, the potential shattering, maybe the seed moisture content based on color, maybe the amount of rust and ergot or any other traits. I envision this as a very powerful tool and very cheap tool, inexpensive tool as well, that might be used for farmers, for growers. We also expect from this to get a better understanding of the genetics, and that with the intention of moving forward towards breeding. Can we breed for seed shattering, or should we just breed for spike architecture, or should we just breed for composite trait, a little bit of spike length, a little bit of number of florets, or maybe there is no point in breeding because it's mainly due to environment rather than genetics. In that case, we can then adopt other type of agronomic strategies to improve the trait. Currently, we have already taken data from our first shattering nursery. We are expecting to take data this year again. And on top of that, we have a second shattering nursery where it will just give us more data to have more accurate measurements. We are also improving the imaging system to count spikelets and potentially florets. And this is something I didn't talk about much because lack of time, but we are also looking at the potential of using plant growth regulators for high retention. I feel that there is lots of opportunities for improving from the genetic perspective, but some agronomic management will make the system, the whole production system, more effective and therefore more yield and profit. With that, I would like to thank you for your time for listening to this presentation, and the people that have helped me in my research, and the Department of Agriculture for their support. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions while you look at this beautiful image of the Magnesium Research Center.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one question. Otherwise, other questions can be entered in the chat. And Joan, do you want to put your email in the chat so that anyone can
Yes.
email you questions or other things about the lab? Here's a question from Brent. How many years to implement or arrive at a variety?
Oh, nice question. Well, the answer is we don't really know. But the point is that it depends on that variability and how well we are able to capture that. Because it might be that there is much variability or maybe little variability. But if we are able to capture that well, then we can have a better idea how long it will take to breed for to increase the trait. Now, I think we will have very good estimates maybe next year when we have analyzed this data, but I cannot really tell you how many years. But what I can tell you is that it is very possible to develop non-shattering varieties in relatively short amount of time if we are able to measure the trait accurately.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so any additional questions for Joan? You can either email him. He's going to put his email in the chat. Otherwise, there should be time at the end of the programming today for more questions.
Don has been at the University of Minnesota since 1974. Originally hired as a weed scientist and worked on quackgrass, Canada thistle. Eventually, that led to discovery of mode of action with FOP and dim chemistry that led to the development of resistant perennial ryegrass that kind of kickstarted the ryegrass production in northern Minnesota. More recently, Don has been working on the Forever Green project, developing perennial grains and oil seeds and all sorts of crops. Don, at our last Minnesota Crop Improvement Convention, was recognized with the Achievement in Crop Improvement Award for his lifelong commitment to the seed industry in northern Minnesota. So welcome, Dr. Wyse. We look forward to your presentation.
Asked me to talk about, where we've been, and I'll just say a couple words about that. But for me, a lot of you that know me, I'm more interested in the future. And what I'm going to do today is try to highlight some of the things that I see coming and give you an update on some of the things that are going around in the area of food proteins. But first off, I'd like to congratulate all of you that are in the seed production business, the processing business, input business, and marketing business. And as I travel around the country and around the world, I use you guys as an example of how a community can work together and do great things. And basically for me, the work that I do in the Forever Green Initiative is really based off of the experience that I've had with all of you to think through how a university and a community can work together and do great things over time. So as you guys know, I also lead the Forever Green Initiative at the University of Minnesota, which is really designed to duplicate what we did with the grass seed industry in other regions of the state, as well as Roseau and Lake of the Woods region of Minnesota. So what I wanted to do is give you an update. And this PowerPoint that I have prepared, we're also going to put up on a website because I won't be able to go to it in any great detail today. But I want to make sure it's up and available for you to review and visit. And we will continue to update it to keep all of you informed about what's going on in this whole area of food proteins. So this is part of an effort that's called the Protein Highway. So it's a joint venture between Canada and the United States, focusing on Minnesota, the Dakotas, and then Manitoba and the Prairie Province of Canada, to look at the development of cropping systems that include crops that produce high quality protein products that can be incorporated into food products and then marketed to the world, with special focus on Asia. And just to give you an update, we now have a protein center, the Plant Protein Innovation Center, that works with the Forever Green Initiative in partnership with the food companies to make this happen. So I'm presenting it to you today because it is now getting close to being real, where we now have the teams in place that are working on the development of crops that can produce high quality proteins. And the reason I'm presenting it to you guys today is that I think these are some of the crops that could very well fit into your grass seed rotations of the future, keeping in mind that the climate is changing and it's moving north at about 5 miles per year, right? So in 80 years, the climate projections for Roseau, Lake of the Woods counties is going to be a climate that is similar to the counties in northern Iowa, right? So as things change, continue to look at crops that can fit into your crop rotations as climate changes, I think is something that we want to keep in front of all of the producers. And I want to take a special opportunity today to put this concept in front of you guys. Next. So here we go. So there's that old pea, and some of you guys know the company Purus. They're just building in concert with Cargill a pea protein extraction plant in Dawson, Minnesota. So here we go. Also at the bottom, you see the old alfalfa plant. There's also strong interest in developing alfalfa as a food for direct human consumption. And we now have rebuilt the alfalfa program at the University of Minnesota through the USDA. That is one of the primary goals of that group, is to turn alfalfa into a food crop, not just a feed crop. And then you guys are aware of some of the work that we've been doing on pennycress and camelina. These crops not only produce oil, but they also produce high quality protein. And again, these are just examples of things that have potential to be moved into the system and to be grown in rotation with your grass seed crops. Go ahead. So you guys, I'll go through this real fast. So the role of proteins in foods, it's a essential production of amino acids in the food system. Go ahead. Right, so there's a level of digestibility and of various components. So this is something that's going on in the development of these new crops to make sure that the protein that is being produced has a high level of digestibility and availability of amino acids. Go. So you guys know the role of go on, next one. The role of proteins for muscle growth, and a very important component of the human diet. Go. So the roles of proteins in food, color and flavor, they are a very important component in almost all processed food. And what I've learned is there's a tremendous range in the functionality of proteins. That's why the food industry is searching for a new set of crops that have certain proteins that have a certain level of functionality in foods for the future. Go. So the role, just to reemphasize that again, the role of proteins in foods, it provides texture and flavor, elasticity, and all of those things that that I'm sure most of you are very well of. They're really important components, not only for nutrition, but functionality in the development of food. Go. So why is this important? There's going to be a shortage of protein in the world in the next number of years, right? So as the global demand increases based on the increase in the human population in the world and the move towards plant-based proteins, there's going to be this huge demand for new forms of protein for the human diet around the world, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world. And the demand is going to be for both animal protein and plant protein for direct human consumption. So there's going to be a balance of that. And there's also a new strong interest in deriving new proteins from other crops for feeding livestock as well. So the demand for protein use in both animal systems and in human systems is going to increase dramatically. And all we're proposing is making sure that Minnesota, the Dakotas, and Manitoba is working together to be able to deliver effectively as this demand increases. Go ahead. So this just shows you some numbers and the billions of dollars that are going to be available for purchase of these proteins. And the increase is quite dramatic, 8 to 10% over a period of time to 25. And then they're expecting after 25 to really have it explode over the next 15 years. Go ahead. So there's a growing interest in sustainable, environmental friendly sources. There's a whole issue about animal welfare. These are all things that are increasing the demand for plant protein for direct human consumption. Go ahead. So from the producer's perspective, this would be the producers, this would be the food industry that's being reflected here. In other words, they want to be in a position to address consumer demands, seeking lower cost protein ingredients, unique competitive place in the market, and replacing chemical ingredients. Working with food companies over the last number of years, they're looking for producing a food product that only has 3 ingredients, and they all go back directly to a crop species rather than having additives. And I think this is what I understand is a possibility to develop these flavors and textures without additives by selecting new sources of plant proteins. Okay. So trendy applications, they're always, you're hearing about these meat analogs, protein beverages, protein bars, extracted products. This is an immediate demand, and the projections are this is going to just explode over the next 10 to 40 years. Go. Or the common protein ingredients or uses, new and emerging protein ingredients, what are some of their advantages? So go next. So the most commonly used food proteins today are milk protein, soy protein, egg protein, cereal proteins, and meat proteins. Go. But this is what they're starting to look at, right? They're looking at the pulses, peas, chickpeas, lentils, and the oil seeds that you're now aware of, and the 2 that we're working on, camelina and pennycress. They're finding that pennycress has some really unique proteins that have high level of functionality in food, but there's also some downsides that we could get into. So others, potatoes, oat, hemp, corn, and almonds. And the one that isn't on here is alfalfa. And that is really gaining a lot of traction. And for me, it's really exciting to have the potential of having alfalfa in the rotation. It's highly profitable in rotation with in the grass seeds that you guys produce. Go ahead. Trendy sources, benefits of the Field Pea. It fits into Minnesota's rotations. It fixes nitrogen, and the other advantages that have in the current marketplace that the crop in place is non-GMO, and that certainly has, you know, a positive as well as a negative as it moves into the marketplace. Go. Then the oil seeds that we just chatted about, canola, sunflower, camelina, and pennycress. You guys all know they are oil seeds, but many of them also have high levels of protein. So after extracting the oil, using the protein for direct human consumption is all part of this new processing and application, not just using the protein for livestock feed, but using it for direct human consumption. Go. So some of the advantages, you know, allergies are still a big deal, right? The other reason for looking for new sources of protein is because proteins that have been in the marketplace, folks have developed allergies to, and putting a new protein source also helps alleviate that possibility, at least for some period of time. Go. And here comes hemp as another example, has unique proteins as well, and is now a new emerging potential for us here in Minnesota. Go ahead. Again, it's non-GMO, it's non-allergenic, it has a protein that's highly digestible, all right? But its performance isn't the best, I understand, in food products. So the areas to be addressed, how new plant proteins can be replaced or combined with traditional protein ingredients. That's what the food science folks do. Looking at extraction, unique characteristics. And for us, how do we incorporate these new crops into the cropping systems in Minnesota, including the grass seed producing region of northern Minnesota that you guys represent. So the world is focused on securing an abundant and sustainable supply of protein for the future. In the context of climate variation that's occurring, how can we develop a more robust and sustainable supply of protein for direct human consumption? Go. So what I wanted to do, and this is what I will keep in front of you folks for the future. So here we go. So we're trying to generate $20 million in resources to make this happen over the next number of years, leading with the leadership coming from community members, major food companies, small food companies, and the University of Minnesota. So we're taking this forward as a FAR project, as also funding from various foundations, from Walmart Foundation to the Walton Family Foundation to McKnight and others, trying to put this package together to move it forward. Go. So in the premise is that in generating these resources, there is this strong interest in developing plant proteins for direct human consumption. Go back once. There's a word that I want you to kind of focus on and how we're describing this. It's called climate smart agriculture. You know, the climate is changing. And will continue to change over time. There's a push to reduce greenhouse gases and all of these things. We think that we can develop a highly productive agriculture systems that deals with those environmental issues as well as the economic issues that are facing farmers. And I would also argue rural communities, right? So the work that you guys have done over the years, not only supported your income, but you guys also contributed dramatically to the stability of Rosso and War Road and even Williams over the years. Go. So what I want to point to you is, so we're not just talking about protein for human consumption, but we also are looking for new sources for livestock feed. Go. So the key requirements, new crops, new cropping systems, and that's what I want to focus on this for you guys, is that I think this is going to potentially bring new crops that you can work into your grass seed, into your grass seed rotations. Go. Right, so high quality, cost-effective ingredients and products for industry. So it is in fact the industry that's pulling it along with the consumer, right? So there's a strong economic pull. And when you see that, that gives you some indication that we probably ought to be ready for that move, all right? Farm supply chains. So that's really what the Forever Green Initiative does in terms of working with farmers and communities and processors to help develop the market and the supply chains for these new crops to deliver new proteins into the marketplace. Go. So, but to do that, as you guys all know, there's a whole series of pillars that have to be dealt with: the finance, the policy, just like you guys got insurance for perennial ryegrass. There has to be development of trust and cooperation. So it takes a lot of effort to put these things together. And so the first investment is going to be design that I talked about, in terms of the $10 to $20 million will be going into putting this network together. Go ahead. So joint development of cropping systems, new ingredients. And what I want to point out to you here, this is how Forever Green is organized, is to do all of these things at the same time. Developing the crops, the cropping systems, developing the new ingredients that can be then moved in partnership with the food industry. Go. So one of the big ones that we're going to be focusing on is that alfalfa. And like I said, we have a new opportunity with the restructuring of the USDA alfalfa program on the St. Paul campus in partnership with the new Plant Protein Center. I think that there's going to be a possibility of developing big new end uses for alfalfa. Go ahead. And you guys all know how alfalfa could fit into cropping systems. Go ahead. High quality, cost effective ingredients. That will be one of the big pushes as well to move these ingredients into the food system. Go ahead. So this is the model. So innovation comes out of institutions like the university. They go out, but they have no value unless they are transferred into these pilot studies to actually do the evaluation in the very way that you guys organized to look at whether or not you could develop an industry around the grass seed that was being produced by industry in the University of Minnesota over the last 70 years. And then going through this cycle, right? Go out and implement some of the plantings. And then the reason we're having this meeting today, this is the feedback to the researchers, that conversation back and forth with the industry to decide how we all work together to deliver that new opportunity. Go ahead. So the whole idea is innovation and scaling, just as you guys did. You guys scaled up your production and processing and marketing opportunities over time, and we would be using that similar model in the development of these new perennial protein crops. Go ahead. So basically, this is the summary of this work. We're basically going out and trying to organize around these various new crops and test them out in various communities across the state of Minnesota in partnership with the food industry. And so we think Minnesota has the capacity to be a major leader in partnership with NDSU, South Dakota State University, and the University of Manitoba. Working together with the food industry and farmers, we think that we can bring on a whole series of new opportunities for farmers, rural communities, as well as the food industry, right? So I'll stop there. I will stop there, and there's some more in this slide set, and I hope Nancy will help me put it up on the website so people can review it in the future, and we would hope that we would keep it up to date. So if those of you that are interested can come back to that site and look at the updates.
Great, thank you. With the technical snafu we have, we're running a little bit behind, so we'll just go right into the next presenter. But thank you, Don. And also, we will put Don's email. I think a lot of you already know how to contact him, but we'll put his email in the chat so that you can relay questions. So thank you, Nancy, Don, and Richard.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, our next presenter is Dr. Nancy Ehlke. Been working on grass seed research in northern Minnesota since the 1980s, I believe. Her title is plant breeder, but she's also done a lot of work on production management of the grasses, legumes, native seeds. She's kind of been the do-all in the grass seed production system. Just like to recognize her technician, Don Velikson. Don was recognized at the last Minnesota Crop Improvement Annual Meeting with the Honorary Premier Seedsman Award. So Don's been working for the project since the 1970s. He started under Dr. Laddie Elling and moved over to Dr. Nancy Ehlke, working with Dr. Nancy Ehlke when she came on board. So Don is involved in a lot of the research Nancy's going to present. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Nancy Ehlke to present the research update.
Thanks, Richard. Can you hear me?
You're good to go.
All right. Thanks, Cody. As Richard indicated, this research wouldn't happen without Don and Dave working on the project. And to give you an idea on the research that they've done this last year, the summary of the data tables that you normally get in person is now posted on the website that you see at the top of the page. If you just go to turfumn.edu and click on the research tab, you can find all the seed production research I'm going to talk about and all 25 of these tables. Plus, it's all been cataloged over the last number of years that are accessible to you if you want to go back through any of the other years. So I want to follow up on some of the things that Don Wyse has said. The climate is changing, excuse me, in particular in Roseau. There is data from the last 50 plus years on precipitation and average temperature in Roseau taken at the farm. On circa 2 of the big events that we had over the last production year, so to speak, in 2019 in the fall, we received over 14 inches of rain, and likewise in the summer of 2020, we received over 14 inches of rain. So temperatures are going up, rainfall is going up. Our 51-year average for annual precipitation is about 22.7 inches. In the past 11 years, as you can see on the bottom of the slide, 8 years had above average rainfall, averaging 26.7 inches of rain, which is about 4 inches over the average rainfall. We've seen that trend before, and the rainfall events tend to be heavier and spottier. In the summer of last year, when the plots received the 14.5 inches of rain, the Overton Williams only received a little over 6.7 inches of rain. Temperatures also going up. Temperatures about 2 degrees warmer on average over the course of the year, the last number of years. So now I want to go over some of the trials that we've had in the ground. First one is a fine fescue variety trial. You can see there's a number of hard fescue species. MNHD, which was recently acquired licensing rights by RL Growers, is one that's been done very well for us for a fine fescue variety in Minnesota. You can see it yielded on about 900 pounds per acre in the first production year. Some of the other species we've looked at in the past are chewings, the creeping reds, the strong creeping reds. We've had some issues with maintaining seed yield as well as having adequate seed yields to begin with, and that continues to be the case here. The MNHD is out of Eric Watkins' breeding program, and it yielded quite a bit more, about a third more than the other 4 higher fescues in the trial. And previous research with this particular variety has suggested that it also maintains its yield over years, which is something that is critical to making fine fescue seed production somewhat economic and enticing to the growers. SPHD that you see in that table from the previous table is also a selection out of MNHD for improved turf quality. It didn't have quite the seed yield that MNHD had, but it was the second in the trial at 745 pounds per acre. And it'll be interesting to see how well that one also maintains seed yield over the years. And we'll keep this trial in for at least 2 more years to see how those entries perform over years. One of the things that makes this an attractive species to Eric in his breeding program is their consumer preference data suggests that fine fescues would be a preferred turf for homeowners due to the low maintenance characteristics of it, lower nitrogen, lower water requirements, and less mowing. However, it hasn't quite taken off in the marketplace like Eric would like. Another species that we've done some work on is tall fescue. We actually have an MMDA grant through the Agri Grant Program, looking at how to maintain or improve tall fescue seed production in the area. And again, Eric has an entry in the trial, the MNTF 15, which ended up being the highest yielding entry in the trial. We did see that yields are maintained quite well in this trial. It was seeded in 2018, and in 2019, the first production year, it averaged about 1,150 pounds overall, and it went up about 100 pounds in 2020. Again, good yields off the variety that Eric developed. And most of the other ones, except of course, Kentucky 31 and the forage types, tend to actually have good seed yields, at least in the initial production. So most tall fescue entries did yield well in the trial in 2019 and 2020. We are continuing our research to develop best management practices for tall fescue seed production, as I mentioned, through that grant. The residue management is something that's been critical in a number of these grasses. Was to bale off the straw after harvest, and then in September come back and clip it to 4-inch height and bale off that residue as well. That seems to work fairly well, though it's fairly labor intensive. And as we see with the fine fescues as well as the tall fescue and with the perennial ryegrasses, that with the turf breeding program located in Minnesota, testing the experimental entries in your growing conditions, that we're able to actually produce varieties that have very good seed yields that are targeted to this part of the production area. Intermediate wheatgrass or kernza is another crop of interest, and Don didn't talk much about this because he was talking the protein highway, but I know a number of you have actually produced some kernza in the past. MN 1504 is the experimental designation. It's now called MN Clearwater. It is the first release variety out of the Kernza breeding program. It has yielded fairly well in northern Minnesota with an average of 774 pounds per acre over 3 years. Excuse me. Yeah, the entries out of the Minnesota breeding program, which are the top 4 on that table, all tend to yield pretty well. Again, a case in point where you're reading for the target environment. Rush, the one on the bottom, which is a poorest yielder in the trial, actually is a forage type and wasn't selected for seed yield. As you can see, by the way, it is a poor seed yielder. So there's really a lot of interest in kernza as a perennial grain crop. The crop was originally developed at the Land Institute in Kansas and is now being researched at various land grant universities with a large effort here at Minnesota through the Forever Green Initiative. The breeding project is being led by Jim Anderson. I think all of you know Jim as the spring wheat breeder. And the first variety, MN Clearwater, was released in 2019. They're actually actively developing supply chains and markets for kernza. Seed yields actually tend to be high, and the yields are most stable across years in Roseau, Minnesota, compared to other locations in the state where the trial is in the ground. And the residue management on this trial was to chop and bale in September after the first production year, and then it was followed by burning in September of 2019 and 2020. And the Fertility has been applied in the fall at about 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre to maintain those seed yields. To perennial ryegrass, and we'll spend a little time looking at a number of the perennial ryegrass trials. The variety trial is the first one. As you know, the University of Minnesota varieties tend to yield very well in this environment. For example, Arctic Green has always been a high yielding variety in the trials. The issues with the University of Minnesota varieties is that they're not as high a turf quality as we would like. So we've actually still working on integrating higher turf quality into our breeding program by having a collaborative arrangement with Pure Seed Testing. And so you see a number of their varieties in this trial as well, such as Gray Fox, Silver Sun, Silver Sport. And so we have a crossing program going on to introduce the herbicide resistance that's in our materials with the better turf quality of the Pure Seed testing lines, in hopes of releasing varieties in the relatively near future that will have better turf quality while still allowing you guys to produce those seeds. So as I said, we're continuing that joint breeding program. Our major goal is to get better turf quality in our varieties that carry the herbicide tolerance. The University of Minnesota varieties do generally have the highest seed yields, although there were some good seed yielders with Mountain View seeds with Grand Slam GLD and Fastball, and Pure Seed Testing, the Silver Sport, actually produced comparable seed yields. The newest release that's going to be produced is Galactic Green. It was also tested under the experimental MSP 3999. If you want to look at older data for it, it averaged about 1,274 pounds per acre over the 2 years, so it was 14% over the trial mean. So it has a little better quality as than, for example, Arctic Green, and just slightly lower seed yields. We also continue to look at tweaking the production systems as a way to help improve the economics of the system. And we've been doing a lot of work on nitrogen fertility, trying to figure out what the best nitrogen rates are. And you can see the treatment number 2, the one that's highlighted in maroon. That would be the standard recommended split rate of fertilizer as it stands right now. We'd be putting 30, 50, 50 on in the fall, and in the fall that would probably be end of September or October. In this particular trial, it went on 10/23 or the end of October. And then we would follow up with the spring application of 110 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And if we can look at some of the data from this trial, you can see that the yields did not vary significantly among all the treatments. There were some that were slightly better and slightly worse, but in reality, most of the treatments aren't significantly different from each other as long as you put on the 140 pounds of nitrogen. Obviously, with no nitrogen fertilizer, you don't get any yield, but we're averaging about around 1,600 pounds in this trial, and this was done with Arctic Green. If we look at a summary of the data from the last 10 years for perennial ryegrass, and you can see that we still recommend the split applications. So treatment number 3 in this case would be the recommended standard treatment, where we put on a split application with 30 pounds of N going on in the fall and the remainder going on in the spring. We've actually upped the recommendation for P and K from 40 pounds per acre to 50 pounds per acre in 2019. We are starting to see a little less of a response in seed yield to the application of P and K, because we've gotten our levels of fertility up higher than they were when we initially started working on the fertility requirements of ryegrass. And there has been some indication on occasion that adding a little bit of liquid fertilizer or ESM fertilizer is advantageous. So there were a few differences observed between the fertility treatments. If you look at the summary of the research over time, it has demonstrated that applying 10 to 20% of your spring nitrogen as environmentally sensitive nitrogen has been shown to be beneficial. The best treatment listed over the years was the 4th treatment, which applied 30, 40, 40 in the fall and 110 and an additional 40 pounds of P in the spring. However, as I said earlier, this treatment may become less advantageous as medium to high soil levels of phosphorus are starting to show up in soil tests. We have seen a response to nitrogen rates over 140 pounds per acre on occasion. It's a slight increase in yield, so it may not be economical in terms of the extra costs associated with nitrogen, and it can also cause more lodging and harvest issues with the higher rates of nitrogen. So at this point, we're still recommending the 140 pounds of nitrogen total going on the crop. Fungicides are another issue with perennial ryegrass. As you know, we primarily have issues controlling rust. Quilt is one that's used a lot. The fungicides are either put on once or twice. If you look at treatment 6, 7, and 8, we've added grizzly as an insecticide. As you know, there were some issues with armyworms this last year being in the crop. Revitec is actually a new fungicide that was just on the market, and it is labeled for grass seed. And what you'll see is that all of the additions of the fungicides all resulted in an increase in seed yield over the plots that didn't receive any fungicide. And some of the quilt, the Prexor, were slightly, and Foliker with Prexor were probably the highest yielding in the trial. Excuse me. So due to the wet conditions, as you know, we had all that rain. We had the 14 inches of rain in the middle of the summer. We were only able to harvest 2 reps on this particular trial. There was also a fair bit of variability associated with the trial, which may be one of the reasons we didn't see any significant differences among the treatments, except for the one treatment listed with the Foliker, Priazor, and Grizzly that yielded a little bit more. The addition of the insecticide to the fungicide treatments did not give a consistent result in seed yield. Revitec, as I said, is a newly labeled fungicide for grass seed crops, but it's expensive, so it may not be cost effective for production in northern Minnesota. And this data, as well as the data for the herbicide work, should be interpreted with caution due to the lack of adequate replication. We only were able to harvest 2 reps, and also due to the high degree of variability in the field due to those wet conditions. And as with all pesticides, care should be taken to rotate the chemistries or the active ingredients to minimize the development of resistance by the pests that we're trying to control. Growth regulators are another key part of ryegrass seed production. Apogee is the standard that we normally use, although Palisade has looked good in some situations. And in this case, the low rate of Palisade, that's 0.75 pints per acre, actually yielded very well with 771 pounds per acre, and was similar to the results used with Apogee. Again, this is another field where the variability was quite high due to the over moist conditions that we had. Again, we were only able to harvest 2 replicates of this trial. There was also excessive vegetative growth observed in this trial, which may have impacted seed yields, although they all still seem to have yielded pretty well. Apogee has generally been the growth regulator of choice due to it being consistently able to increase seed yields and standability. However, the low rate of Palisade produced very good seed results in our seed yields in this particular trial. And a note about Palisade is that nitrogen additives should not be used with Palisade. And all growth regulators had a positive effect on seed yield. The inconclusive results, if you look at the back at that table, for the 6 ounces was probably due to location in the field or the large variability associated with the stands, and not actually due to the treatment. So there's no good biological reason why the 6 ounce would yield less than the 4 ounce or the 8 ounce treatments. We also have a grant looking at the production of hybrid rye, and we looked at both fertility and herbicides on rye. And then the herbicide or the fertilizer applications is this trial. Rates range from 0 to 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen. One of the treatments did include an addition of sulfur Yields went from 30 bushels per acre up to about 95 bushels per acre. You can see that there is some increased lodging, especially with the application or the addition of sulfur to the fertility. And the plants were all quite vigorous, as we would expect with rye. So the fertilizer went on either in the fall. It applies as 840-60 in September of 2019. That was followed by the application of the nitrogen in May of 2020. Just to get a quick look at what's happening with the fertility, you can see there's a dramatic response to nitrogen, which isn't a big surprise. So in order to produce high rye grain yields, you're going to need to have high levels of fertility. Minimal lodging occurred even at the high end rates, with most of the lodging occurred in the treatment that had the addition of sulfur. There's a trend for upward seed yields up to the 160 pounds per acre. It's not a big enough data set to say that conclusively, but it appears that it's starting to plateau off after that particular rate. And there's more trials being planned with rye at this time due to grant funding received again from the MDA Agri Grant Program. In terms of herbicides, we have a couple of, we looked at 5 different herbicides for weed control in hybrid rye. You can see that if you look at the data, the no treatment yielded 73.4 bushels per acre. These yields are a little lower in that the trial only received 80 pounds of nitrogen as opposed to the higher rates that we saw in the fertility trial. Treatment 4 and 5, the curtail and the bison plus axial treatments actually had stunted the ryegrass some, and treatment 5, the bison and axial treatment, also produced yellowing. So there was some visible injury from some of these herbicide treatments. And as well as you can see from the yields that even though there were no significant differences between the treatments, all the herbicide applications reduced the grain yield of the rye from the untreated. On herbicide treated plots, it was 74 bushels versus 65 for the average of all the treatments. And again, using curtail M and bison plus axial resulted in stunting or yellowing of the crop, and it produced the lowest grain yields overall based on that herbicide application. And the yields overall are lower than the fertility trial because we only put on the 80 pounds of nitrogen. Higher nitrogen rates should have produced better grain yields in this trial, or higher grain yields. With that, I'm going to skip the herbicide trial and ask if there's any questions that I can answer.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Are there any questions? Folks can put them in the question and answer box. I think we have time for a question here.
I did want to say before I forget that Eric Watkins and I are very appreciative to the Minnesota Turf Seed Council for the funding we've received, and that Joan is actually, his research on seed shattering is actually being funded by the group this year. And also to Dave and Don for all the work, and Dave for writing all the grants. We've been quite successful the last couple of years at getting funding.
Great. I'm not seeing anything right now. We can enter Nancy's email. I think a lot of you know how to contact her, but we'll enter that into the chat if there's any follow-up questions. So
thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
And yeah, again, just want to remind all the growers out there that all that research packet is available online. I believe the link to that was posted in the chat or somewhere, but the progress report for this year, along with going back to the back at least 20 years, are posted online. So if you're looking for information, go to the website. With that, our next presenter is Dr. Dave Grastrom. Dave's works on the plot site along with Nancy and Don. He's going to give us a report on grass seed residue management and the value of baled straw. The straw baling has become pretty prevalent over the past couple of years. So with that, take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, now is this thing going to work for me? Cody, here we go. All right, we're good to go. Well, greetings from Roseville, Minnesota. We're well, I shouldn't say slowly, pretty quickly moving from ice fishing and hockey season to spring planting. Last week or so, we've lost quite a bit of the snow. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about residue management and value of straw. This is a project that's a joint project with AURI, MDA AgriFund, the Turf Council, University of Minnesota, and Grower Cooperation. As Richard mentioned, the last few years, we've seen quite a few bale piles at the edges of the field and kind of want to do a little bit of work on what that means for the grass seed industry. This is quite impressive to me. This is taken in early March in East Grand Forks across from the American Crystal Sugar Plant. And they tell me there's about 22,000 bales at that time in these piles along the road. And they're kind of a staging area. Bales are coming from all the way from the Canadian border to Ada, Minnesota. Most of them were wheat straw, but there's some perennial ryegrass as well. You see a semi-truck there on the one picture. They tell me there's about 49 bales or 49 bales per load. So that the 22,000 bales gets you about 450 loads, semi-loads of straw. The main use for that straw, guys tell me, is going to the livestock industry in southern Minnesota and Wisconsin and states elsewhere. So residue management, we talk a lot about that. You kind of wonder, well, we're raising seed. Why should we care about residue management? Well, other than a good stand, the next thing, in my opinion, to attain that top end yields is to get a good residue management program. And that really sets the table for a bumper crop. And that's kind of what we're all looking for. We're going to get that bumper crop. And so good straw management is a key. So uniform straw management, I can't stress that enough. What I mean by uniform, out the back of the combine, and I'll show a picture in a minute, but really both the straw and the fines, get that good uniform spread, allows for a better burn if you're going to burn, if you're going to harrow, better, more efficient harrowing, and reduce probability of the gaps that we see. And gaps in ryegrass stand is a bad thing, depending upon how many and how large, can have a pretty significant consequence on end seed yield. So residue management, what am I talking about? Well, the picture with the combine, that's a ryegrass underseeded to wheat. And you'll see what really is the key there is out the back of the combine. You want that residue to hopefully get across the full header width of the combine. Get that uniform spread. That's really the goal. And it's worth taking the time to make sure that happens. Baling the straw is important. Get that off right away if you can. Harrowing the straw, that's important for both if you spread the straw or baling, applying the P and K in the fall, come back with a harrow to move that, incorporate that P and K, but also remove any piles of or glumps of straw that might be there. Glumps not a real scientific term, but clumps or clods or whatever you want to call it. When you're harrowing, one of the things I'd caution is if you do have a lot of clumping, stop. Don't. That's going to make matters worse. You want to have a good flow out the back of that spike tooth harrow. And then burning, we've done that for years. Bluegrass, it's critical. Some of the research we've done, I went and looked back, can be up to 85% less seed yield if you don't burn. So if you're raising bluegrass for seed, that late summer burn is a key. It helps get that light into the canopy and helps that seed set. In ryegrass, spring burning has been done sometimes. Spring clipping has been another time, but it's really unconclusive of how that works. If you are going to burn ryegrass in the spring, that's got to be done early. And I'd say get it done before the accumulation of 200 growing degree days. Later than that, with spring burning, you always have a delayed response, 10 days, 2 weeks. With later burning, you get more stand loss, and that's not a good thing for yield. Consequence of the poor straw distribution, that's what I'm talking about. The gaps, we see these, that straw acts like a blanket, smothers the ryegrass. The picture on the left. On the right, you'll see that kind of zebra striping. We don't like to see that. In this particular case, this field was not harrowed. So we had some straw and fines that choked out some of the ryegrass plants. And then you get delayed maturity, and that makes it a challenge for cutting time. But also you do have just reduced yield potential. So that's really the keys of why you want to get that good uniform straw distribution, however you choose to manage the straw with ryegrass. So the residue project really had two objectives. The first one was to look at kerns and MHD. We have a pretty good handle on how to control or manage residue in ryegrass and bluegrass. Not so much in kerns and MHD, so looking at burning, baling, and clipping. And then we want to determine what's the quality and quantity of this straw that we're seeing in these piles along the highways. A field picture of the kerns on the left, MHD on the right. Trials are set up the same. You see the dark areas that was burned in the kerns. You see the residue is left, and then the clip and bale, and then double clipping. It's not easy. It's not as easy to see in the MHD. You've got less material, but where you see the greener block there, that was the burn trial. So the quantity and quality methods, samples were taken after harvest. Square meters were taken, an average of 2 for each of the grass species, 2 per site. The samples were weighed and dried, and a subsample was submitted to AURI, and AURI did the quality analysis we'll talk about here in a minute. So the residue project partners, EURI, they did the quality analysis. MD AgriFund provided the funding, Turf Seed Council, University of Minnesota, and the farmer cooperators. And I guess to say a quick word about that, we really are, over the years, have just great relationship with farmers. They help us out tremendously. And this year was Magnuson Farms, Dave Dahlgren, Eric Magnuson, and Tony Broding. The picture on the left, this past year saw quite a few of the straw piles were tarped. The year prior, not so many. With the heavy rain we had in 2019, found that tarping the straw was a good thing. So the companies are taking the extra time to do that. So straw value, what's the value of straw? I said, well, it really depends. If you're feeding it to livestock, replacing the nutrients in the soil is taken out, bedding, mulch, organic matter. Won't spend a lot of time today on the other ones. We'll talk mainly about the replacement of nutrients. So what do we get? About guys tell me these straw bales are about 1,000 pounds, give or take. So the range that we found in the last, in years gone by, listed there for perennial ryegrass and wheat. That's kind of a long-term average. This year, what we saw, Kernza was 3.7 tons. Perennial ryegrass is 1.7. Kentucky bluegrass 0.8. Hard Fescue was 1, and wheat was 0.9. That's kind of the yield we had, based on the samples that we collected. Just in a bar graph to show you what that looks like. The grass seed species are on the x-axis, tons per acre on the y. You see Kernza, I'm not a very tall guy, but Kernza is taller than my head, so that's why we get more tons per acre. Perennial ryegrass a little over 1.5 tons, and the other two are a ton or a little bit less. So the next thing is then what is contained in the straw. So now we know how much straw is produced, at least in 2020. AURI, we sent the samples in, and they performed an analysis and say, well, if we have different grass species, the Kernza, ryegrass, bluegrass, the MNHD, fescue, and spring wheat, what's the NP and K levels in the particular forage species? You can see there's some variability on plant species. I guess the take-home message to me is now that we know these numbers, then you can calculate an estimate of what nutrient value is in each of those species, and then whatever your area of interest in can calculate a number that what kind of nutrients that are removed. And in the case of perennial ryegrass, based on this year's data, each ton would take off about 53 pounds of total of NP and K. So the dollar value, just take the current retail price of fertilizer, and that's going to vary from year to year, but you can see the values that we used, plug those into that particular figures, and come up with a dollar range of 15 for wheat and 27 for perennial ryegrass. The dollars per acre based on number of tons, you multiply the tons we saw times the number of dollars per ton, that's come up with a number, and it's probably better showed here graphically. So this is showing the dollars per acre on the y-axis and the grass species on the X. So the first one is dollars per ton, You look across and say, well, MHD had a higher value per ton. You think about MHD fine fescue. The term fine fescue is well-deserved. It's a fine leaf, so you got more leaf and less stem. So not surprising from the relative feed value point of view, you get a little higher number. Wheat, on the other hand, is pretty stemmy, pretty straw, pretty dry when it's done. So it's a little bit less. Looking at dry matter per acre, like I mentioned, you take the total tons that we collected times the dollars per ton. You see Kernza, approaching $80 an acre. That's basically based on the tons produced. So you can show that what it looks like. Other people have done similar work. This is Dave Franzen. He found out that, about total is about $14.40 a ton. We had $15.10, so it's kind of in the ballpark. This is 2019 data, 1.5 tons per acre. And that's what he came up with. Some winter wheat areas, Hay and Forage magazine, similar numbers, $14.93 per ton. So just real quickly, wheat and straw and organic matter, field burning, when you do it, we know we're going to lose the bulk of the N and the nitrogen and sulfur. P and K not quite as bad. So we field burning, I recognize that we're losing the anions. You need about 2 tons of organic matter to maintain organic matter. And we know about 1/3 of any residue will eventually become organic matter. So after 10 years, if you remove a ton, you'll reduce by about 0.3%. If we're removing 2 tons, we can double that. So that's, I guess, summary, just get back on time here quickly. We know that residue management is important. Bluegrass, the late summer burn is a key. Ryegrass, spreader, bale to straw, harrowing is an absolute must after you put on the P and K. Spring burning and spring residue management and perennial ryegrass, not really conclusive at this time. Kerns and MHD, the residue management, that's the research we got going on. We'll find more as we go. The various dry matter production of the 4 species was 0.82 to 3.7 tons, quite a range. And the nutrient replacement value ranged from 13 to over 77. And the number of bales, the number of 1,000-pound bales was wheat was 1.5 to 4, and perennial ryegrass was listed there. So with that, these are sponsors of the research listed here. Here's my contact info, and hopefully get us back a little closer to back on time.
Great, thanks, Dave. I think we have time for a question if there are any. Otherwise, yeah, Dave has put his contact information there on the slide. You can follow up questions with him. Seeing none, yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Richard.
Okay, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Cody. Our next presenter is Anders Mondrup. He's the head of field production in Europe for DLF Seeds. DLF is the largest grass seed company in the world, based in Denmark. Anders has traveled all over the world looking at field production and, North America, Europe, all over the world. He's going to give us an update on production and marketing turf seed for 2021. So welcome, Anders.
Thank you very much. Hope you can see and hear me. And thank you for having the opportunity again to present for you guys, because I remember clearly when I was there back in 2014 visiting you. And by the way, that was bloody cold at that time, as I remember. So now it's more or less 7 years since I've been with you, and thank you for the opportunity to come back and tell a little bit about, let's say, what have I been working with, and then to address also the agenda point that you put up with me. I will try now to share my screen, if possible. Let's see if that works. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, you just have to go full screen here.
Exactly. Let me wait here. Okay.
Perfect.
You see it now? Good. little bit the background. I'm heading the field production in Greater Europe. And Greater Europe, we are talking about the seed that we're producing for Europe and for exporting out of Europe. I've been working with the company now for 20 years. So now that you ask an European to present, it will little bit be based with the background of how I see it from the European side, but I also will try to address the global part. I put up a little short agenda here. First, a little bit who is DLF and where are we, and then some field production statistics, Europe, global, where I will try to, because you are called turf seed, so I will try to address towards the turf and also to address through the crops that you grow in Minnesota. Also, let's say a little bit the market balances, how's that looking from Europe, and also a little bit global. Then I will kind of stop up for questions, and because it will be better that if there's something that I have not addressed, then shoot some questions if I have passed something. If there's time enough, then I could give you a little update on the, let's say, political climate that is going on in Denmark, and what I can see a little bit also is coming towards you in the US. But let's see how time goes and how time flies here. Good. Just a little bit. DLF is a Danish company. It is owned by 3,000 seed growers. Actually, we have 2,100 of them who are active, and they are electing delegates, and they are electing a board. And here you see the happy board members of the DLF company. And we have been working, trying to expand over the whole globe. And I have a little bit put up for you here. Then let's say what has happened since I was in a talk with you last time. It is mainly that we have expanded on the Southern Hemisphere, because we have been purchasing the company PTT Rights and Seed, who are, let's say, originally from New Zealand, but and then also working in Australia and South America. In US, it has been X-Seed that we have been enclosing in the company, and then a little southeast of you, La Crosse in 2008 is now also part of the DLF company. But I don't want to, let's say, borrow you too much with the company, but just to tell that we try to be thinking globally. And then I put this global map up here, not to, let's say, talk about the points that are there, but maybe to give you a little bit global overview on how I'm thinking on, let's say, if we think production of grass seed, where you are, let's say, in the country who produce way the most grass seed that is produced on the globe, that is produced in US. And then coming back to that, let's say you all the time say turf seed, and way the most of what you produce is turf. And of course, it is with you in Minnesota is mostly perennial. But where I come from, which is then the second biggest growing area on the globe of seeds, here we are actually, when we talk grass seed, then we say 55% is turf seed, and 45% is for fodder. So we are really, let's say, we are more a mixed thing, if you want, when we talk of the grasses. Then out in New Zealand, it is mainly fodder. Of course, less production that we have on the Northern Hemisphere, but there we talk further. And also when we talk about the other place that is actually also producing seed, it is more or less, if you want, South America. There we also talk further. So you are the turf guys, we are the both fodder and turf, And then actually all these guys are actually producing the fodder types. So when we come to the market and the balances in a minute, then we talk 50% of the European harvest, and then we talk more or less all of yours. When we again define a little bit that it is turf that we are discussing. Then a little bit about seed production based, and I take it a little bit from the helicopter, because we already let's say addressed a little bit these sizes, and if we say that we exclude alfalfa, and yeah, sorry, you are the main area on the globe for the alfalfa business, and that is in US, but we have a tendency when we look at it from Europe, since we are so small in alfalfa, that we a little bit exclude the alfalfa, and then we look at more the grasses and the clovers, and say that we probably are looking at a global market of 600,000 tons. It is probably plus now, because I think we have generally a growing consumption and less, and then of course also the production. But in round figures, North America is including Canada, 50% of the global production. You're probably 300,000 tons plus. We are more or less, if you want, in Europe, we are like 1/3, and then comes a split of Oceania and South America and others with these a little bit less percentage-wise. But we're now talking, let's say 80% plus if we stay on the northern hemisphere. Then I'm European, and then you also will have a little bit on the, let's say, on the European split. There, Denmark is production-wise a little more than 1/3. Then Poland is 13%. Poland is a little bit the cowboy country in Europe, because if we look at, let's say, we could also take that Germany is 11, France is 10, and Czech down in the center of Europe is producing certain species, but it's like this, the 7%, and then you have 6 and 5 like Holland and Sweden. Normally, we in Europe have fairly good control of the production, because the major players in the European market is more or less producing in these countries. But there's not of the major players that really are producing in Poland. And we have a market right now in Europe where we are the competitive crop to producing grass seed is more or less barley, winter wheat, and then orchard wheat. And because of the, let's say now it's increasing prices on the cereals right now, and also actually on the orchard wheat, but still grass seed production is more profitable bottom line than is the other crops. And that means that and that's why I'm coming a little bit back to that Poland is more a little bit the cowboys, because when the prices on cereals is low, and then grass seed prices are being favorable, and then they increase their production, because they are now in a size of what the biggest that they have been over the last 20 years, and they are still increasing. So Poland is a new player, if you want, size-wise in the European production. Then, just to give you a flavor of, now you're coming from a part of the globe where you're producing mainly perennial. I'm actually looking at, if you look at the Denmark part, which was the 36% of the total production in Europe. There you can see that we are close to, we talk hectares in our country, so we're close to in Denmark to be 100,000 hectares, but you can see half of it is perennial, and we are actually increasing. So our perennial, I'll come back to the perennial balance in a minute, but we can see that our perennial ryegrass is increasing. I've been 20 years with DLF and has been kind of looking at the split of, let's say, how big was perennial ryegrass balance-wise earlier in Denmark, and there we were at actually a lower percentage. Now you can see we are getting close to 50% of the production, and I think that let's say the perennial ryegrass is growing to be covering more and more because of the breeding is actually securing that a perennial ryegrass is much more variety-wise than it was earlier when it was more, let's say, a rough cowgrass or turf grass. Then it can do a lot of things more now. And as you can see, we are increasing the production. The second biggest is actually red fescue. Red fescue is fitting very well in Canada and in the northern part of Europe. Then we have tall fescue with these 7%, something like that. Then white clover is relatively big, and as you can see, we kind of have increased it. And then Kentucky blue is also a species that grows very well in Denmark. But that was just to give you, let's say, a little bit a flavor of the production that we're doing in the northern part of Europe. Because then I kind of thought that, okay, you are perennial ryegrass, so I should try to address a little bit then, how is the global picture when we now can take production statistics? How is the global production of perennial ryegrass? There you can see we are relatively big in Europe. North America is lower. Your production, as you very well of course know, is that you are more to annuals and to tall fescues than you are to the perennials. And then this is actually Oceania, which is mainly New Zealand, who is doing the rest here. And if we now take this into to countries also, and you look at the statistics, then you can see that we in Denmark and in US are producing more or less on the perennial ryegrass for the global business, the same amount. And New Zealand comes, then Holland comes in, Poland is here and is increasing, as I told. So they are becoming a bigger and bigger player in this, and this is actually Germany, and then some minor countries producing also. This was actually, I just mentioned it. I will skip this one because it's actually just your own production, but this is your home country. So of course you know that the sizes of and how the US split is when we talk the tonnage of production. Then we have fairly good statistics in Europe. When I say EU 27, and as you know, we used to, until 2 months ago, we were EU 28 because there we had a United Kingdom, England on board, but they decided that they wanted to stand alone, and they're not part of the EU anymore. But we got fairly good statistics on production and consumption. I will not be able to give you this for any other part of the world, but I can share with you here that, let's say, the balance of the grass seed that we have, if we take the EU 27, there you can see that we are more or less producing, which are the orange stables here, the 200,000 ton. We have a fairly stable actually also consumption. And then the stock is here, which is a little more than 50% of the total consumption. I think or let's say, my observation on how that is in other parts of the world is that we have a high stock level, because I think it's lower by you guys. It is also lower in the southern hemisphere. But here we take the stock in all. This is not only by the companies, it is also by the wholesalers. It is all levels before the end user, because it is a relatively high, but it actually is in fairly good balance. And this is actually where we like to be on the balance. As you can see, the import-export is also fairly in balance. We normally, the imported seed that actually comes into Europe is actually coming from US. Depending on the dollar rate and where we are with the dollar rate, it is actually down here, as you can see, 25,000 ton. And the export here, export out of Europe, that is mainly China, Russia, and then also a little bit for the US. This is our balance on the grass seed on the total. Since we are addressing a little bit the perennial, here's our perennial. And as you can see, even for Europe, I showed you for Denmark, but half of the, let's say, consumption and production of grass seed in Europe is actually, as you can see, Perennial Ryegrass. And actually here we're also in a fairly good balance. We are increasing, as I showed you in Denmark, but not in any dramatic things on this one. Then actually my last slide on this one is actually little bit the where is the market? Where am I feeling that the market is? And I can tell you exactly 1 year ago when Corona started in Europe, as it also did in the US, so it's a pandemic. There we were in the grass seed business really concerned. We were really saying, oops, what can happen here? And actually 1 year after the start of the Corona pandemic, we must say that business has been normal, and even I put a plus on, because consumption has actually been on the grass seed has actually been really good, and we're looking into let's say this is our spring season coming, where it's the main market is going on in Europe, and I can say we even see an increasing use of grass seed. And what has happened? The fodder has stayed normal. It is so that, let's say, the farmer level of what is needed for the fodder, which is again I'm now basing it on the European level here, is and has been stable, because the animals are there, they need the feed. But the professional turf has been down. And actually it was dramatically down spring, summer, autumn last year. Now it's coming a little bit up again, but the consumer turf has been very good. And I think actually, Richard, you said it in the beginning, and I heard that your feeling was more or less that, say, this is also what's happening in your country. But people sitting home working on Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever, because they've been sent home and sitting working, they are looking out the window for 5 working days and looking at the lawn that is actually being not that good. And then when it becomes weekend, they go to the store and then they buy more turf. And I can tell you, for the business that we see in Europe, that is overcompensating the professional turf that we're missing. So it has actually been running fairly well from that side. This was actually bringing me to this one, the question. I have other slides, but I think I would take a stop just to secure that I also cover what you asked me to cover, or giving you a little bit the overview. So maybe I will stop up a little bit and hear if there's questions and other things you think I should cover.
Anders, this is Richard. Yeah, we'd like to take some extra time. You know, you'd mentioned the political changes. If you'd like to talk about that, don't feel that you have to end this. I do have one question though regarding production. It's with the increase in grain and oilseed prices, you know, the U.S. and Europe, the competition for acres, does that lead to more or less grass seed acres in going down the road with increased oil and grain seed prices? And then if you go into the political changes you were talking about.
I let's say the understanding, and I think you also as grass seed specialist know that it is always a balance to competitive crops, and that the prices now are going up in Europe, and I can then also only actually talk from the European side, is giving a pressure on planting crops. But the northern part of Europe, where there is a balance to, let's say, the yields of winter wheat, which would be lower than what they really can do in the southern part of Europe, I can kind of feel that let's say we can still plant the seed. The farmers are interested in planting the seeds at the prices that we pay now. So there's coming a pressure if we talk Europe, but it's not so that the grass seed will not be planted. I think there will come a bigger production of grass seed, and that will be fulfilled. But I can also feel when I talk to my U.S. colleagues that there is a pressure in your country that the higher prices of other commodities is putting a pressure on possibilities to contract seed in your country. And when I talk to my colleagues in the southern hemisphere, I can also hear that there is pressure on getting the seed produced. But I'm sure it will be produced. Other questions? Comments? Are there species that I should have covered that I did not cover?
I don't see anything right now, Anders. Again, people can raise their hand, put it in the question and answer or the chat. If you want to just continue into your, we have time, I think, and Richard and Marv have told me that they'd like to hear. Oh, someone asked how many participants were on the call today. There was about 68 participants on the call today, so thanks for that question. So yeah, Anders, if you want to continue talking about the political changes, that would be great.
Okay, give it a little go, because there is really a green climate in Denmark. I suppose that you maybe have heard about it, but Europe is, and the European Union is really, let's say, having a green agenda, if you want. There is a ban and future restrictions on pesticides. We are really depending on having minor uses or derogations for the use in grass seed. I know that you are not having these same restrictions, but we are actually really being pressed production-wise in Europe on this one. We are actually looking at a future ban of Roundup. It is really under heavy pressure, and if the politicians could decide now, then they would ban Roundup. And actually, as you also know, that our society has changed, so the farmers' opinion is not really voting so much anymore, and actually the majority decides in a democracy. And we are really, let's say, uphill, but they are also listening to the security of the food produced by the farmers. But we are forced into other new technologies instead of really depending on having a herbicide to every single weed or a fungicide to every single disease. So we are really forced into new technologies, and our breeders are really also forced to find more resistance toward fungus and these kind of things. We also have limitations on fertilizers. And there is a greening program, which actually means that our crop rotations makes it a little bit more limited. It's also an opportunity for a grass seed company that you want to have green cover over winter. These in-fixation crops, these kind of catch crops, actually there's a huge demand on getting a green winter through them. Then we have GMO ban and all the new, let's say, as you know, we cannot use GMOs in Europe at all. Now there is new breeding techniques like CRISPR-Cas and all these gene editing tools, but our authorities have put them into the GMO basket, and so it's banned. We are now working to get what we call the mutagenesis, which is actually that the breeders can help the plant to do what it also could do in nature. So keep these kind of things outside GMO. But we really are working with getting these possibilities available. Then grass is the green agenda. We also try to tell them that grass is also part of the let's say the capturing the fertilizer, that a green grass over the winter can also be, instead of discussing leaching of fertilizers, then grass is a part of the solution on these ones. And then and Don, I like your presentation on let's say all this about protein. We are actually really looking into protein in Europe also, and actually we are now having, let's say, instead of importing all the soya coming typically in Europe into from South America, we're really working on proteins on local based grasses and alfalfa. And this is actually a concept that is coming. I thought that you were in your presentation, there was also perennial ryegrass that you were working with. We, as also, let's say, the farming industry in Europe is actually working with this specifically also. And here's actually a little bit of a picture, which is actually that we will in the future work with, that the grass captured here will also feed the pigs, because we will go in the grass refinery, go into the protein thing, and then actually so that we can feed also the monogastrial animals with proteins here, and even human consumption we're discussing. Capture the protein from grasses, from alfalfa, and from others. But I think that is nothing new for you guys. Okay, time is flying. So this was actually my last presentation here. So or slide here. So I'll stop my presentation, and if more question has come up, I'm happy to answer.
Great, thank you, Anders. Do we have questions from the group? I see a question from Joe in the a question and answer session. He asked about the Zoom archive. Richard, we are recording it, and the whole thing will be available. Richard or Marv, do you know which website that will be available on? Or Nancy?
I think we'll put it on the Turf website where the data is.
Okay, great. So, and I think we have the ability to send that link out then to everyone that registered today. So we'll do that.
That would be great.
Okay.
Anders, one quick question for you. The trade in the, ryegrass, the grass seeds in general are worldwide trade. Would you expect seed is going to flow out of Europe to North America, or from North America to Europe, or does everybody just have just enough to satisfy their own needs?
Good question. It is, history shows that is depending on the dollar rate. So dollar rate is really depending. Sometimes you float us if the dollar is right, then we see your seed coming in to Europe. Actually, we also, when the opposite is there, and which actually could be a little bit right now, we see that there could be opportunities that we might be able to ship a little bit towards US. But I think the consumption, though, is growing in both US and Europe. So I don't think it will be a major thing as I look at it right now. You have actually some quite high standards on purity. So we see that the let's say a little bit the obstructions of Europe exporting towards you is that you have high purity demands. But if I look at the balance right now, I don't think there is a great potential either way with the dollar rate that we have now. So I don't think you should be scared regarding seed coming from Europe, and I don't think we should, as the circumstances are now, be afraid the other way around.
Thank you.
There was a question. Sorry, there's a siren passing me here. There was a question for Don here. Don, what is being bred out of alfalfa to make it palatable for humans? This is from Brent.
Well, I'm not the expert in that area, but the new team is going to take on all of those challenges. So we have a biochemist, we have new geneticist, a breeder, working in partnership with Pam Ismail and the protein center. So they're basically going in and looking at all of the flavor traits, increasing the capacity to extract and process alfalfa protein. And they're also trying to increase the oil content in the leaves. So there's a whole series of things that are going on. And I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this group. The USDA alfalfa group is now up at full force. As you guys know, a lot of you know, all of those people retired over the last 10 years, and now they're back fully in place. And one of the focuses of that program will in fact be on food grade proteins from alfalfa, and they'll be looking obviously at a whole series of ways to modify alfalfa to make that a new possibility for the future. And also as part of that, and there's that, we're also looking at, and I didn't mention it today, but also we are very interested in the grasses, right? And as a new source of feed protein as well as human protein for the future.
Great. And I did just drop in the plant science research team in St. Paul. I dropped in their website. So if you'd like to contact them or look at any of their research, it's there in the chat. So I do not see any other questions right now. Or hands
Okay.
raised, so
If there's no more questions, Cody, I think we'll wrap things up. On behalf of the Turf Seed Council, I'd like to thank all our presenters for their presentations today and also for their research. We really appreciate it. The value of that research comes home to help profitability for our local growers. So again, we really like to thank the researchers for their work. It really helps us out. With that, I think, and I'd like to thank all the folks for attending today. We actually had pretty good turnout. Weren't real sure doing a Grass Seed Institute for the first time on Zoom how this would go, and a few glitches, but it's gone pretty well, and we've got good attendance. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Cody, for running the program for us.
no problem. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
See y'all.
Thank you.